Hey buddy, how's it going? So let's say Putin is hijacking this election, which let's remember there is absolutely no evidence for. Like most things, it's just projection. They're the ones who are trying to steal this election, the Democrats, that is. They're the ones who are trying to commit voter fraud and electoral fraud, bus people around to different polling stations, typically across lines. They even have gotten so sophisticated at it that, as the Project Veritas video showed us, they've realized that, hey, if we bus people around, that looks pretty fishy. We should just rent out cars to people and have them drive across state lines and vote that way. So yeah, all this talk about Russia influencing our election is um, totally bullshit. There's no evidence for any of this. But let's say that's true. Why would Russia want to influence our elections? Well, let's try to be empathetic, right? Let's look at this from Putin's perspective. Putin is leading a country that is not geographically secure. You know, it doesn't have oceans it can hide behind like the United States. So in order for it to be in a secure position, militarily speaking, it needs to be a bit more assertive. Now, it might not feel the need to be assertive if NATO was not encroaching on its borders. And keep in mind that when the Soviet Union collapsed, shortly before that, it was agreed that NATO would not go east of Germany. It would stay in Central Europe, and Eastern Europe would become some sort of, I guess, demilitarized zone to keep the Russians and the West apart. That's not what happened. Whether it was a lie from the beginning, which I think is probably likely, or it just didn't work out that way, wasn't intentional, but hey, shit happens. Either way, from Putin's perspective, the last 15 years has seen the West slowly encroaching on his western border. Russia is a country that 80 years ago was invaded, which led to the deaths of tens of millions of people. Russia is not very comfortable sharing any kind of land borders with a country that is aligned to a foreign power that is as overwhelmingly stronger as the United States is compared to Russia. So let's say we're Putin. We recognize that Russia is in a strategic weakness. We understand that annexing Crimea to ensure that Russia's access to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea was secured with the port at Sevastopol. Um, and we see in the election cycle of what is roughly our primary rival, the United States, one of the candidates is discussing using military, well, discussing several things. One of them is using a military response to hacks. As we've seen in the media, as we've seen with the so-called intelligentsia, they do not demand any evidence whatsoever that Russia is behind the leaks to WikiLeaks or any of the other outlets that have put stuff out, Guccifer, people like them. No evidence at all, but Russia will be blamed. They also look at a candidate. I'll give you a hint who it is, who is saying that they want to institute a no-fly zone over Syria. Syria is a country that's been historically aligned with Russia. The state is an ally of Russia. It cooperates with them. Their relationship is maybe not all that different from our relationship with a country like South Korea or Egypt. It is an allied state. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, and it's one of the last few places that Russia still has projection power. So the civil war breaks out. Russia moves in to protect the government that has historically aligned with them for several decades at least. And now the United States, one of their candidates, is saying that we will institute a no-fly zone over Russia's ally and control the airspace above that. Well, the only way to do that, to enforce that airspace, is to destroy all anti-aircraft fortifications that are on the ground. I'm not a incredible expert on Syria. There's a lot of stuff to try to take into account. I like to think I'm a bit more informed than the average person. So most of those anti-aircraft fortifications, to my knowledge, are in civilian populations. Um, this is not to, force us to make some sort of moral choice, but, shoot the civilians to bring down none of that. It's a strategic choice because they want to protect the civilians. So they're going to put the anti-aircraft weapons where the most people are. The only way to take out those anti-aircraft weapons are to destroy them and risk killing a very significant number of civilians, and that's assuming all of our strikes are successful, which doesn't always happen. Things go very wrong in war. They always do. No war has ever ended as everyone intended. So Russia's looking at that. One of our candidates is saying that, and the other candidate is saying that he wants to work with Russia. I'll let you take a guess who it is. I don't know. I mean, you're a smart guy, right? You should figure it out. One of the candidates saying, I want to work with Russia. I want to focus on destroying the Islamic State. And, at this point, they are a global force. They're involved in several countries. So breaking them in Syria and Iraq is not going to completely eradicate them, but it will certainly, set them back at least. It's where they are their strongest. And he's saying, look, I want to cooperate with the historic power that has exerted influence over this country, Russia, and not try to oust the legitimate government of that state, which is the Assad quote-unquote regime. People call things regime when they don't like it. Even if Assad was a dictatorial madman, which he isn't, he's, in terms of dictators, if you want to call him that, he's pretty mild. Not saying he's great, not saying he's perfect, but he's the thing that needs to be there for the Middle East. If you're still under the delusion that the Middle East will ever become a Jeffersonian democracy, I have no words for you other than exasperation and sighs. You are living in some sort of weird Looney Tuneville that I don't think you'll ever recover from. This is not a region of the world that will probably ever have long-term, stable, representative democracy. Excuse me. So let's take all that into consideration. All right, we're still Russia. Don't you think there's some motivations for Russia to hack our elections? Hypothetically, they're not hacking it, but let's say they were. Why would they be wanting to do that? Why would they be so invested to make sure Trump gets elected? Maybe it's because Trump is not threatening nuclear. I guess I just told you whatever. That was a stupid game. Trump is saying he wants to cooperate with Russia. It is a great turn of events that the Democratic candidate is the one who is hawking for conflict with a nuclear state, which is what a no-fly zone over Syria will lead to. Russia will not allow us to disarm their ally like that. We would not allow the Chinese to destroy South Korea's anti-aircraft weapons and South Korea's defenses if a war broke out on the Korean Peninsula tomorrow. We wouldn't tolerate that. We'd say no, we've made agreements with this country. We're going to stick by these agreements. We're not going to secede authority to you with the vague hope that maybe you will make attempts to counter the threat. In the case of Syria, ISIS, which the United States has done very little to do. We have armed every so-called moderate group in the country in an attempt to overthrow the Assad regime. We have spent very little effort trying to target ISIS. The vast majority of our intelligence efforts, as well as what air power we are deploying in the region, we are trying to target. We only target ISIS when it's beneficial to the rebels. We do nothing to cooperate with the Assad regime, with the Assad government, excuse me. This is, of course, an insanely stupid thing to do, I think. The top priority should be to crushing and breaking the Islamic State. And we don't need to send in a ground force. We already have ground troops in Iraq coordinating things. A little while ago, some soldiers were gassed. There was a gas attack deployed on them. I think another gentleman, I think he was an officer. I can't remember the context at the moment, but he was killed. So we've have KIAs now back in Iraq. Third time's the charm, I guess. So yeah, we are intentionally ignoring the only military on the ground that is capable of challenging the Islamic State and achieving victory. These rebel groups are not interested in secular modern democracy. They're not interested in peace. They want to destroy the Assad regime and institute their own Islamist governments. The only difference between them and ISIS is that they don't necessarily claim to be a caliphate. They don't claim that they should be the hegemonic superpower of the Islamic parts of the world. They make no claims to that, so they're nationalists. They're nationalist Islamists, as opposed to ISIS, which is a globalist Islamists, I guess you could say. Again, I'm not an expert on this issue, so if you think I've gotten something wrong, please let me know. I'm pretty confident most of what I said is, broadly speaking, accurate. But hey, I'm always happy to stand being corrected. But all that being said, all this fear-mongering with Russia that the media and the Clinton machine is doing is throwing our relations back with a nuclear power, a nation that we share very common interests with in terms of, at the very least, fighting Islamic terrorism. Russia has its own problems with Islamic terrorism, mostly from the Chechens in the, I believe, the Caucasus regions. Kind of north of the Caucasus Mountains is where the Chechens live. It's a huge problem for the Russians, so I think they're quite sympathetic to our cause of reducing and combating Islamist movements and jihadist movements to the best of our abilities. We should not be destroying a secular dictatorship in the hopes that democracy will flourish. Democracy will not flourish. You will not turn the Middle East into the 13 colonies. You take away the strong man, all you'll have is a Islamist movement, because that's all that's going to be around to assert order and authority in the region or in that specific country. So yeah, if you want another Iraq, if you want another Libya, vote for the corporate warlord Hillary Clinton, and she will deliver it to you. If you want a chance to make peace with a nuclear power, a fairly significant regional power in the world, to have us, calmly and confidently back off from the proverbial edge of war, which, maybe it won't go nuclear, maybe it will. What's the gain to be made to justify rolling those dice? There is no gain for us, the American people. Absolutely none. There's, I suppose, some monetary gain for the pockets of various politicians who like to have special donations given to them by foreign governments. Special cruise ship plans, I guess. I think that's what the Israelis do. So yeah, we need to stop asserting ourselves into a situation where we do not have clear strategic interests in mind. What our declared interests are will only lead to more chaos in the future. And we should work to now containing as much as we can the Islamic State and fighting them via proxy with the governments, specifically the Syrian government. I can't imagine they're very interested in cooperating with us after we bombed them, killed dozens of their soldiers, God knows how much of their equipment that they desperately need. So I can't imagine they're very eager to work with us. But I think we should at least try to do the best that we can in order to avoid further escalations with Russia. Western human civilization is not worth destroying the Assad government in the tiniest hope that democracy will come back. One day America's got to learn to stay home. One day this country has to learn to just keep its damn nose out of other people's business. We're not very good at it. We don't have the interests required, or I should say the attention required, to look after these countries and try to get them to a flourishing point. If you take human biodiversity seriously, it's probably not even possible, because in a lot of these countries the average IQ is in the low 90s or even high 80s. Many of them have consanguineous marriages with first cousins, second cousins, even siblings. These are not traits that incline the population to be personally disciplined enough to be peaceful with their neighbors despite religious or ethnic differences, and to work out their problems through a court system or the democratic process, as opposed to tribal warfare and the occasional genocide. That is your choice. That's what you're going to get if you vote for Hillary Clinton. If you want to drain the swamp, excuse me, and see what we can salvage from this horrible, retarded fucking situation that the globalist initiatives have brought us into. If you think it can be stopped, if you want it to be stopped, if you want peace in the Middle East, or at least more peace than there's been in a while, vote for Donald Trump. Take care, buddy. Peace.